Good Saturday afternoon, everybody. Meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center as Hurricane Hanna gets closer to making landfall here in southern Texas. We do see the satellite imagery really telling this story here, as we do have a Hurricane Category 1 as of last check here, but the pressure has been falling. This storm has been intensifying here as it gets closer, and you can really see just based on everything that it's getting pretty bad there in indoor parts of southern Texas. Some of these hurricane reports there as we're getting that eye closer to shore. I'll show you the Doppler radar to give you a little bit better perspective here in a moment. But we see some of these reports coming in now here with this really telling satellite image of the storm system. You do see here a report just a little while ago there, winds to about 85 miles an hour there at a buoy there. 17 miles north of Port Mansfield. Another report, winds to 83 miles an hour there. We're looking off of Port Mansfield a pretty good ways, but Port Mansfield right now seems to be the epicenter of this, as we're getting reports of some significant issues in toward that area based on what the Weather Service has been saying here in the chat session that I've been looking at over the last little bit. So we're going to be checking that for more information here as the afternoon does go along, as we watch for potential for tornadoes as well here. But again, this is the overview of the system. We'll go ahead and pull up the meso overlay now so you can kind of get a little bit better perspective on the winds. You can kind of see how they're evolving here. New information, a gust, by the way, to 87 miles an hour now. So as you see the system here getting closer to making landfall, we'll go ahead and put on some of the Hurricane Center information. I know it's kind of cluttered here. I'll go ahead and take off the satellite and some of our wind information at this point, but the hurricane hunters have been out here and they're getting that latest information. So valuable, so important here. So let's kind of dive on into this right now. We'll get over to some of that other details, some of that other information here in a moment. But right now, let's go ahead here and look in toward this area. We're able to kind of give you some of the more up-to-date information here. And you can see where the lowest pressure has been here down. It looks like to 970 millibars, and then the winds up to 81 knots here, and that's just in the last little bit. So this storm's continuing to intensify here. I know the National Hurricane Center will be giving an update here in just a moment on the storm system. So let me go ahead and check to see if we have that yet here on their website. And not yet. The 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 o'clock Central is what we have up there with the 973 millibars. But we're definitely looking at this latest data because that's what is in there in toward the updates from the National Hurricane Center. So we're watching the recon information. So valuable, that data, doing a great job out there, just like the National Weather Service offices in both Brownsville and Corpus Christi here. And this is a pretty busy day for those folks here with a landfalling hurricane. I mean, if we look back here, going back to earlier in the week, Tuesday, there was less than a 50% chance of tropical development in the 5-day period, and now we're having a hurricane here in just the next little bit making landfall into toward parts of southern Texas. In terms of those wind fields, I know we see the wind field out over the Gulf there from a little earlier, but this is what we're looking at. Luckily, this is a relatively rural area where landfall is expected, where the worst of it's going to occur here, it looks like, from this storm, but still people are being impacted. Areas north and south here as well. We're getting some impact into some of those zones too, and we have that flooding potential. We'll get into all that here in a few minutes. We're going to stick with this here past about 4 o'clock, I think, as we get some more information in, and then we'll be doing these updates every 15 minutes or maybe a little more often here as necessary throughout the afternoon and evening hours as we watch this storm eventually weaken down to a tropical storm, as you see it getting down here toward the Rio Grande City area. So this is the perspective here on that. Let's pull up the Doppler radar. I know we've been kind of going between some different things, so let's pop up that right now. I'll move away from the Hurricane Center information for now, and you'll be able to see how things are looking here with this storm. This is a composite, and you'll be able to see here some of the eyes starting there now to move on shore there in southern Texas. Now we have to have the center of the eye or the lowest pressure moving on shore here to actually deem a landfall. So let me go ahead and check where they found that lowest pressure at. The recon, the aircraft out there. So let me go ahead and pop this back out. This is very important to give us this information here from a meteorological standpoint. And you see where that lowest pressure is. It's right with this L right here. and this tells a story. We're looking at that here. We're looking at that. So if we go about 8 miles per hour with that lowest pressure off toward the west here, we're still 22 miles there from that lowest pressure area. So probably it's 3:50 Eastern, 2:50 Central right now. So probably in about 3 hours or so we'll have a landfall. So right around 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Central, just based on the latest radar analysis here. So just trying to let you know. But right now conditions are already significant there in toward the region, already very dangerous and dangerous conditions here. As we continue to look here at this image, I'm going to check to see if we have new information at the Hurricane Center, see what they're saying now here. And they haven't sent out a new update, so I'm going to go ahead and pop up what we had in the system here from just a little while ago. As looks like now a wind gust to 103 miles per hour here out toward a buoy there north of Port Mansfield by about 17 miles or so. That was a little earlier, but just coming in to the system. So now getting gust over 100. So the information I'm about to say you, these numbers are going to go up even just a little bit more with the sustained winds there, 65. But with those gusts, I think they might bump this to 90 or so based on the recon data we're seeing as well. So this is at the 2 p.m. Central Time update from the National Hurricane Center. 85 mile per hour maximum sustained winds. The movement west at about 8 miles per hour here. And you see this making landfall here in the next few hours, and then still a hurricane here as we look toward maybe around 7 o'clock Central Time tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern, as we're looking here in southern Texas. That wind, that rain, the storm surge, that'll start to let up some here as we move along, but then the tornado threat may be increasing some here as the system, the center of the eye, does get over land. So we're going to be tracking this here, that hurricane warning remaining in effect from Port Mansfield to Mesquite Bay, as we do see a very nasty scenario. We have a storm surge threat here as well we'll be talking about in just a moment. But first off, I do want to talk about this flash flooding threat because this is getting into some of those areas that are away from the coast here. We want folks to be cognizant of what is happening in spots away from the coast here too, because there's a moderate and a high risk zone where over a foot of rain possible in some of the isolated spots, and that's a very dangerous threat there. But we also have that threat for storm surge as well, and that's already been occurring in some of these spots over the last little bit. That's really taking hold here in some of these areas. I know Padre Island getting some pretty significant reports there. The storm's overachieving, and that can happen with a storm that's intensifying upon landfall here, because you just have the elements in play here where things are just progressively getting worse, and that causes more issues in a storm that's weakening, even if the strengths are pretty similar, because maybe the gauges here maybe not even getting the best idea of those winds there at the surface as we look ahead here and be able to kind of estimate things, because by the time the conditions are occurring, if it's intensifying, they're already higher than what had been talked about. So it's kind of a complicated thing to explain, but it's just interesting to note when a storm's intensifying upon landfall, you have some issues. And I see that earlier today a tornado was reported there in Texas. We're looking here toward that region as we look toward the Refugio area, it seems. Refugio County, 6 miles south-southwest of Woodsboro, a tornado there. And the Weather Service just reiterating now 103 mile an hour wind gust measured there in toward the buoy about 17 miles north of Port Mansfield there. So that's not what you want to see as we're looking at this information. But again, these winds here, these are fueling that storm surge, and they're causing those issues. And then the storm, I mean, we're getting that tornado threat to evolve as well. It's a busy afternoon. Let me go ahead and we'll switch this back on over to our other computer right now. We'll pull up the tornado threat so you get a look at that here. We'll continue to watch for that threat of storm surge and all the other threats that we've been talking about. But let's get over to the tornado potential right now. We do see the biggest tornado potential to kind of put a measure overlay on. We're watching that northeast quadrant some, but then as I zoom in, we're also watching here areas off toward the west of Corpus Christi as this moves inland here as well, as we are going to be seeing this storm make landfall here in the next few hours. Again, I'm putting it around 5 o'clock Central Time, 6 o'clock Eastern, about 3 hours, because we saw that eye there, the center of the eye, the lowest pressure at least, about 22 miles off the coast here in southern Texas. Now, in terms of some of these observations here, we'll go ahead and say you some of these, and these are always important to see. We're getting some pretty nasty observations here as we get down toward the Harlingen area. Tropical force gust here, sustained winds near tropical force, tropical storm warning in effect as we get down toward this area. Hurricane warnings just to the north as we have a gust of 42 knots here at Port Isabel. And then we don't really have many centers here because we're getting toward Kennedy County, Texas, as we're looking where some of the worst of the accidents occurring. And luckily, that's only a county there with about 400 people there, 400 residents. And that is something that's really lucky, honestly, because as I kind of broaden the view out, we'll put the Hurricane Center information back on up here with the recon, of course. And then I'll go ahead and put on our category information here and the wind radius, because we're talking there in toward Kennedy County where they're going to be getting the worst of this. 400 people, that's the third least populated county in the state of Texas and fourth least populated county in the entire country. So that's some luck here on our side, and it looks like they're making landfall in this area. And I know, looking back, a pretty similar situation. It's going a little stronger than this, but back in 1999, Hurricane Brett made landfall in a similar spot. It really intensified quickly to a major hurricane, and areas here, they got lucky because we were looking here, areas like Corpus Christi and Brownsville, the worst of it kind of stayed away from the population centers. So even though these areas are getting hammered here, and we're going to have to watch that flooding threat here later on, the tornado threat, this isn't over by any means. There were fatalities with Brett. So our lives very important, of course, here with this scenario, with this weather situation evolving here, as we don't want to just focus here on spots. As we look off toward the north, off toward the south, we're going to be wanting to focus here on the more rural communities here as well. So let's go ahead and we'll go ahead now and kind of take off the Hurricane Center information. We're going to go ahead and kind of look back here at some of these wind reports here. And we'll continue to track this. I think let's pop up the actual Corpus Christi radar right now, because this will give us a little bit better perspective here in toward this area, a little bit better perspective for everybody here at home. So let's go ahead now, and you can see as I pull on the wind mode now, we have winds here just above the surface. I mean, we're seeing winds to 100 miles an hour here. So some of these reaching the surface, and you see there in Kennedy County where we're getting some of those impacts there on Fort Mansfield, for instance. You're really getting into this wind potential here, and we're really seeing some of the worst that our Hurricane Hanna has to offer. And you can see we're looking here also up toward Claiborne County as well. They're going to be getting into some pretty nasty conditions here as this does kind of dip some. It looks like we just got a report there. It may not be valid as there's a maintenance check indicator here, but a gust of 50 knots there at Corpus Christi NAS. And we're talking here in toward that region as we look back toward 249. So seeing some of those conditions that may not be valid, but you see this storm, the eye of the hurricane here, getting closer to shore. You see that bumping up against shore here at this point, and it's going to be making landfall here as we look ahead. Let's check the National Hurricane Center information. Again, we should have a new update from them at this point, and it looks like they're kind of sticking with the information they had here earlier. They're sticking with the maximum sustained winds that are 85 miles per hour, and then the minimum sensor pressure 973 millibars. They're talking here to gust to 104 recently at the observing station, and then a buoy recently measured a gust to 87 in the eye wall there with a 12-foot height. So we're going to be watching that. That's in the eastern eye wall, actually, as we're looking ahead here toward the other part of this. I mean, we're just getting into the front end here in parts of southern Texas. We still have a typically stronger side of the storm to come now with a landfalling system going here from east to west. It's a little bit interesting in that you're not necessarily getting the worst of the conditions here, as this does move along, it will weaken some. We will have a situation here where the core does weaken some, and that'll be some good news for some folks here, because you don't necessarily always get the worst side. As that energy there started to kind of fall apart some, but still pretty nasty conditions in toward this region. Again, a hurricane warning remaining in effect here from Port Mansfield to Mesquite Bay, a storm surge warning in effect from Port Mansfield to Sargent. So again, we'll be tracking this situation very carefully here, and we're going to be continuing to give you the latest information, giving you that latest information here in the Weather Center as the afternoon and evening progresses. That flooding threat here, very important to touch on. Now, this will probably underestimate things some, but you see just over the water here, we still have 2-3 inches an hour rates here. You're moving toward maybe Willacy and Cameron counties here over the next little bit. So we're going to be continuing to track this storm. I know as we look at some other tools, you see some interesting things here on our correlation coefficient as well with this. These winds so strong, and you see these winds. I'm looking on these winds here in the eastern Iowa just a little bit stronger than in the western Iowa, it seems like. Now, again, that might be because of the height, but typically the eastern northeastern side is the strongest here, so that's something to take into account as well. And we're going to continue to gather more information. I do want to look here at a couple supplemental things here before we wrap this update up and leave the radar here up for a few minutes here as we gather the new details. But let's take a look here at the power outage map here, poweroutage.us. We'll go ahead here and pop that on right now as I go ahead and refresh the screen real quick, because it was at 22,000 outages, 22,000 customers, I should say, without power there. Now up to 26,000 customers without power or so in the state, getting about 26,559. So that's always important to take into account here as well to see where the power outages are. So here's that information. You see, as we get toward Clayburgh County, 1,429 customers without power. Kennedy County, there's only 686 customers in the whole county tracked here, and that kind of tells the story. The population shows around 400 or so, give or take, and you have 32 customers without power at the moment. Willacy County, 885 customers without power, so we're definitely watching that perspective here very carefully. We're going to continue to look at that. We're going to continue to look at the storm. And then we're also watching here the coastal inundation dashboard. We're going to go ahead and watch the coastal inundation dashboard here as we go ahead, get into where this region. We're looking at some of these different sites to see exactly where the worst of this flooding potential is at. I know we had a site here earlier getting over 5 feet with that storm surge. That's definitely something you have to be cognizant of here. Now, we have to watch for high tide as well in this situation as we look here, because that's an important factor as well. We're just kind of glancing here at some of the information behind the scenes right now. I'm going to go and pull up one of these. This is Port Lavaca, and we'll go ahead and give you that information here right now on the dashboard, and you'll be able to see what is happening in toward that spot here in toward the Texas region. And you see them kind of moving the numbers around, getting some of those values over 3 feet there. So that kind of tells the story here with this storm surge. These conditions pretty nasty here in toward parts of southern Texas. We're watching the storm surge warning. We're watching all the impacts here that Hurricane Hanna has to offer. I'll be back in about 10 more minutes with more information. meteorologist Casey Cloud back here at 15 past the hour. We still are watching Hurricane Hanna, get closer here to making landfall there in Ward Kennedy County, Texas. As you see the eye there of our storm, you see some of it already starting to come ashore, but we need to center the eye for it to actually officially make landfall here. But we have that wind energy, as you see, inner velocity images here really taking hold there. Some up toward Clayburgh County, but Kennedy County, especially some in toward Willacy County here too. So again, we're going to be tracking this. I know it's going to be a busy day here in the Weather Center, and we're going to be giving you that latest information here as it does impact the Corpus Christi and Brownsville television markets. But speaking of television markets, we actually have a severe thunderstorm warning in the North Florida region right now that we cover here at Clouds Weather, our primary region. So let's go ahead and talk here about what's happening with this over on our radar scope computer. We'll get back to our hurricane in a moment, but I want to let people know what's happening here in the parts of Hamilton County as well as Columbia County right now, as we do have a severe thunderstorm warning here in play. This goes until 4:30 this afternoon. The potential for 60-mile-per-hour wind gust, hail up to about an inch in diameter is there. So we're watching here, moving toward Jasper to worst of this storm here right now. So a severe thunderstorm warning till 4:30. Jasper, we're talking about, again, that community. We're talking about Interstate 75 in there as well. So just trying to give you a heads up there with this inconvenient storm here, but could also be a little bit dangerous with that wind, hail, and lightning potential here in northern Florida. So again, a severe thunderstorm warning there until 4:30. You see some other storms that are sub-severe here across North Florida and across South Georgia that broaden you out a long way. You kind of get the perspective here, some action there in towards southern Georgia. We're going to watch some of this here as we look ahead. You see some of that outside of our viewing area there up toward areas further in toward the Peach State, but also here down toward Waycross, over toward Homerville here as well. We're watching some of this action. You see a hail indicator here as we look closer toward Ware County. So I will be tracking all that for you. Again, a severe thunderstorm warning. This is not related to a hurricane, but again, just giving my viewers here in North Florida the latest information on this. A severe thunderstorm warning here as we look off the Moody Air Force Base radar for Columbia, for Hamilton counties here. Just a sliver of Columbia, but a lot of Hamilton to kind of give you that perspective here until 4:30 this afternoon. 4:30 Eastern time. So we'll continue to keep tabs on that situation, but let's go ahead and talk more about our hurricane right now. I'll be able to give you more information on that, as again, we're still watching this here as it gets closer. You see some of the worst of the conditions here as we've been talking about getting towards some of these coastal communities. We've already got reports here, significant issues in the Port Mansfield. So we're going to continue to keep tabs on this, and I'll be back here at about 30 past the hour with more information. Stay tuned, everybody. Meteorologist Casey Cloud back here at the bottom of the hour with another update on our Hurricane Hanna here. As you see the eye there on the Doppler radar, it's really well defined here as we're looking off of Kennedy County right now, and we're getting closer to a landfall. As you see these winds, I'll pull them on up now. You'll be able to see some of these brighter colors here, indicative of very strong winds here in the region, and we're just going to continue to watch as this does move off generally toward the west here at about 7-8 miles an hour, give or take, as we're continuing to look at this storm here. The pressure's been falling. The hurricane hunters have been watching that fall here, and we'll go ahead and see the falling numbers as I go ahead and switch on to our other computer here. We now have an indication that the pressure has fallen now to about 969 millibars, in fact. So seeing that here in our system now as I look here into toward the region, you see this L here, indicative of that. I'll point it out for you if you can't see it, but again, 969 millibars there, and we're looking here now as I measure this about 15 miles off the coast. So seeing some information here that is very important, very vital to see where landfall is, but areas already here in toward Texas being impacted ahead of landfall. Very serious conditions here as we're getting more reports of some damage, some destruction there in the region. This hurricane's really packed a punch here, so definitely something that folks are having to be cognizant of as we kind of take you over to the broader perspective of Hanna right now. We are getting information there as we're looking out toward parts of that region as we get toward Nueces County, for instance. Webcam there showing the thunderheads on the Bob Hall Pier completely gone. So the Bob Hall Pier, the thunderheads there are completely gone. So things really being impacted here. Now this isn't Hurricane Harvey, don't get me wrong, but this is a Category 1 type storm here that's strengthening our landfall, and it's going to pack a punch, and it's been packing a punch here with the storm surge, with the wind reports here. We're going to have to just continue here to monitor it as it gets closer to shore. We'll go ahead and put up the measure overlay right now so you kind of get perspective here of where the center is. And again, we're getting closer and closer to that landfall, but areas here south of Corpus Christi, north of Brownsville, getting the worst of this storm here at this point. We've been lucky to not have any flash flood warning this year, so that's some good news. We'll have to watch to see if that changes over the next little bit. I'm going to go ahead and pull up some of our forecast model data now because I know this can be helpful in these situations. This can kind of give us some perspective here. This can kind of give us important perspective as we're looking ahead here over the next several hours. You'll be able to see what is happening here in toward these communities. So this is what the model was showing a little while ago here, the HRRR, and then we're kind of moving it on shore here. We're going to get to about 5 o'clock Eastern, 4 o'clock Central. Now you get the idea of where it's at. And I'll even broaden this out to the overall view here, just so you can kind of see this a little bit better. And you see here some of those storms to the north there impacting areas up the Texas coast. The storm surge is still a threat here as well as we're looking toward about 8 o'clock Central Time now. You see some of these areas being impacted 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Give or take Central Time. You're seeing some of these different areas still. And you see that rain around McAllen. That could be a big issue here. All that moisture coming inland, the torrential downpours, the efficient rain producers. So we'll have to watch that here carefully. We'll have to watch for that potential here, that flash flooding threat as the night goes on. I know when you see that water over the roadway, you want to turn around, don't drown. That's very important to remember. Let's go ahead now and pull up our wind forecast here. We're going to see what the wind forecast does look like as we're looking ahead here in the time frame. I'll be able to go ahead here and see about right now, give or take. You see where the winds are, and you see these oranges indicative of those winds, maybe just under hurricane force, give or take. And as we move the time frame along, you do see these storms producing the winds moving along here in toward these communities in southern Texas. So you just have to be very cognizant here of what is happening as we're looking later on in the night. You see that eye there still defined on this as we're seeing the calmer areas there with this storm. But again, that's your forecast model, giving you a little perspective there. We're going to continue to gather more information on this storm. We're at about 35 past the hour now. So I'll go ahead and get those latest details here from the National Weather Service, the National Hurricane Center, and meet you back here in about 10 minutes. Meteorologist Casey Cloud back here in the Weather Center. As we're looking at the live Doppler radar right now, we do see our hurricane. As you see that eye there, very well defined here. So we want folks to stay safe there in South Texas. They're being impacted here by this storm system. I'll go ahead and pull it up full right now, be able to see what is happening here in toward this area, and you'll be able to get a little bit better perspective on things. We even have a special marine warning now in play as we're looking here east of Corpus Christi. We have a water spout here, maybe some water spouts, in fact, in toward this area, and we'll have to watch for that potential as we get closer toward Corpus Christi over the next little bit. But you see these really strong winds here. And just for perspective, we see that about 4,000, 5,000 feet off the ground, we're seeing the winds here to about 90 or so, it looks like. And then we're seeing winds to about 90 on the other side of things as well. So we'll be watching this very carefully here in the Weather Center, giving you that latest information to keep you, your friends, and your family safe in toward this area. I know these torrential downpours impacting Corpus Christi, impacting Brownsville, but they're going to get even worse here as we're looking on the eastern side of things. I know that northeastern quadrant is so dangerous here in Corpus Christi. Will be in that area here later on, as we might have that tornado threat increase a little, because sometimes when you get that center to move over shore, the friction can kind of cause more tornadic activity to develop here. More storms will have that ability to rotate here. So just kind of stay tuned for that as we're looking toward areas around Clayburgh County, Kennedy County, Willacy County. We just want folks to stay safe out here. And again, I just want to go ahead and have that latest information, those ways to get alerts here as well. I'm going to go ahead and come back on camera right now, and I'm going to go ahead and take this away for now, so we'll be able to give you that information. Again, we're still watching the storm system very carefully. I'm waiting for that new advisory to come out here from the National Hurricane Center. It's to come out shortly, so I'm going to try to stick with you here to see if we can give you those numbers live, that instantaneous information, because this is a pretty big deal here. Something we haven't seen in South Texas in a few years. I know with Harvey in 2017, the last storm really reference to come to mind here in toward this area. I know that hit just north of Corpus Christi, the worst of that. I know as I kind of moved the map up, the worst of that hit up in this area around Rockport, for instance. So that's something to kind of keep in mind here as well. So just kind of trying to give you some perspective. We're not getting it as bad up there, luckily, but as we go down toward the south here, we have this dangerous hurricane getting closer toward making landfall here into toward South Texas. Again, a hurricane warning remains in effect here from Fort Mansfield to Mesquite Bay. We also have that storm surge warning remaining in effect there from Fort Mansfield to Sargent as well. So that's very important here to keep in mind too. I'm going to pull up our storm surge graphic here, our storm surge forecast. I know we'll get a new update on this here soon, but let's go ahead and pop this on here real quick. You'll be able to get a look at here what we're seeing in those numbers. You see 4 to 6 feet there in part of this alert area. We're talking there. It looks like from the Baffin Bay area to Port Aransas, including Corpus Christi Bay. I know we had a storm surge number already over 5 feet earlier, so that's very important to emphasize here. Already storm surge there getting over 5 feet and causing some real issues here. I know in some of these communities. We've seen the video here on social media over the last little bit. I'm sure you guys following along with me as well here. You're seeing just different images come out of that region there as the conditions pretty nasty here. Now this isn't Harvey per se, but it's still a pretty nasty storm, still having pretty big local impacts. I see some of the hurricane alerts just coming out here from the local office there in Brownsville. They're continuing the hurricane warning for areas like Kennedy County, getting there toward Willacy County as well, Brooks County. So just trying to give you a little sample in there of that. But I'm going to go ahead and pop myself back on camera here again as we're waiting for the new information to come out here from the National Hurricane Center, from the National Weather Service. And I'm going to see if we have anything, because I know with that hurricane alert information coming out, we might have something, but I don't see it quite yet here. I do know that we're looking at Gonzalo there in toward the Pacific. I mean, not Pacific, in toward, further off in toward the Atlantic, and that's now become a remnant system. And as we look toward the Hawaiian Island area, there is still a hurricane alert in play there. The latest information now, a hurricane warning for Oahu now. So we're talking about areas there on Honolulu, I do believe they're under that hurricane warning now, as conditions will be deteriorating there. The max of thing winds down to 90. We'll keep our eyes on that storm there. We'll cover that as necessary, but a new development there, a hurricane warning in play as we look out toward the Hawaii area. And real quick, I think we can go ahead and pull this track information in here. I know the Hurricane Hunter has been out here as well, but we'll go ahead and pop our other box on so you kind of see what I'm talking about here. With this track, it's going to be very close here to Honolulu. This storm, I mean, just a few miles can make all the difference here. As we pull this up full now, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. You'll be able to get that insider perspective, I guess you could say. And you'll be able to see that this wind field very close. I mean, those hurricane force winds right on the edge. Couple mile difference would get those hurricane force winds into Honolulu here, at least in terms of those gusts probably. So we'll need to watch here for that potential, for that threat. Again, we're watching Hanna right now though, so let's go ahead. We'll move away from this, so we'll kind of get us back toward the Texas region right now, where I know Hurricane Hunter have been very busy, as you can tell. They're getting all the important details that they need to kind of give you that latest advisory here. Again, we're kind of just trying to give you that updated information here. It's going to be coming out here very soon from the National Hurricane Center in Miami. They're going to have that latest information, that latest advisory, and I see the forecast advisory just coming out here. So we're getting very close to having you those details now. So let me go ahead and put on, we'll see the track change here. If I get up quick enough here, you'll see an update live here on TV. And we might already have it actually. Yeah, okay, we actually already have it in the system now. It just popped on in 21Z, so that's our latest update here. And we're seeing those max winds. It shows at 80 knots and 973 millibars. So doesn't seem like too much of a change here, despite what we're seeing with the Hurricane Hunter. I'll wait for the full advisory to break that down for you. But again, this is our storm. You see the wind field now. We're seeing some of the hurricane force winds now. Get in here, get into this region, and then that center, I'll go ahead and measure it for you. We're only talking 8 miles away, so I think right about 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Central is where we're going to have landfall with this system. So that's, I think, about right on target here with this. But again, there's our Hurricane Hanna. I'm going to go ahead and see if we have our new advisory in on our other system now, if I can kind of give you those details here. I know we want to be able to read those to you as soon as we get them out here in full. So just bear with me here. They're just coming in here from the National Hurricane Center. And I don't have them quite yet, but again, it doesn't seem like too big of a change. I know as we're looking here later tonight, you'll be able to see as we get to about 60, so 1 a.m. Central Time. You see that other T icon here on the screen. We're seeing max winds at about 50 knots, gusts to 60 knots. Right now, we're seeing those gusts to about 100 knots or so. So seeing those in excess of 100 miles an hour in toward this area. So we're going to be trying to give you that important detailed information here as the rest of the afternoon now, as we start to transition into the evening. That time frame does transpire here. So again, I'm just kind of stalling right now to give you that latest information here in full from the National Hurricane Center as we get that out here right at about the top of the hour. So I'll go ahead and zoom back out a little bit. Again, you see some of that ice starting to come on shore here. This is our first landfall in U.S. hurricane of the decade here, folks. You're watching history in the making. You're watching that history in the making here in the Weather Center right now. So something that's very, very interesting to see. Again, there's a little wider perspective. You see all that moisture getting up toward Houston even. Nothing too significant up there. No flash flood warnings, anything like that. But still, we're going to be tracking as things do move along in toward the state of Texas here. As we look down toward the Rio Grande Valley, for instance, you're seeing this system, and it does have a very big impact. So, again, the hurricane warning does continue here for parts of the region. That hurricane threat does continue here. So, we're seeing that eye. I know we were kind of seeing a little transition here earlier with it, and we're seeing that maybe a little smaller now as it's tightening up. Maybe getting a little stronger here as we've seen in the indications. So, something that is that you got to bear in mind here in toward this area. Again, we're waiting for that new information here in full, so I can kind of give you those details here. Maybe see if the hurricane alerts have changed some. I think I can go ahead and look at some of that on my other end here. I think we can go ahead and give you some of this here. The hurricane warning is in effect now from Port Mansfield to Port Aransas, as the hurricane warning there north of Port Aransas has been replaced by a tropical storm warning, and then the tropical storm warning has been discontinued north of Port O'Connor. So I know we've been watching a tropical storm warning down in New Mexico here as well. So that's important to bear in mind as we're seeing this get there on both sides of the border here at this point. With this storm, the tracks kind of dipped south here as we've looked in the last little bit. And here's the latest information. I have it in full now. 90-mile-per-hour maximum sustained winds. That movement there west-southwest at 8 miles per hour. The barometric pressure 973 millibars with this storm here. So that's your new information here. I know we kind of gave you a lot of that a moment ago, but I just want to kind of read it off from the Hurricane Center officially in detail here with those details. So about 20 miles northeast of Port Mansfield right now, at 70 miles south of Corpus Christi. And we're definitely watching here. That storm surge threat still involved here in this region. I'll go ahead and take off the hurricane information for a moment. We'll put on our overlay, and then I'll go ahead and put myself back on camera here to kind of explain some things to you here. We'll go ahead and switch us over here away from the wall right now as we're looking at things. Again, we're seeing this storm system. You see that wind here as I'm kind of looking. You see that wind kind of feeding on in here. You're seeing that on the map right now as we're seeing that storm surge with the wind direction so important here in toward the region, playing a big role as we have some very dangerous conditions here. I know we're approaching the top of the hour right now, so we're going to wrap this update up right past the top of the hour. I just want people, if you're just kind of hanging around here, make sure you have a little recap, and if you're just tuning in, we'll go ahead and kind of give you that important recap here. So again, we're right about the top of the hour now. Getting the information there. I see around Corpus Christi, the highest gust about 48 miles an hour, it looks like. So not too extreme, but we're seeing these winds here, especially this south and this north here, this south of Corpus Christi, this north of Brownsville, where we're getting the worst impacts that Hanna has to offer. So again, there's your storm. There it is, getting close to landfall here within the next hour or so along this coastal region here in toward Kennedy County, Texas. We'll be watching it here. Again, the latest advisory now has those winds up toward 90 miles an hour. We're getting close here to a Category 2 storm. I know we need 96. I actually have the Saffir-Simpson scale on a mouse pad here from the National Weather Association. And I just wanted to clarify and verify this here, that we need 96-mile-per-hour winds here to be a Category 2 hurricane. That means it actually needs to be at 100 here with the estimate, because 95 wouldn't quite do it. So if we get a 10-mile-an-hour jump, which it might be kind of tough here, 5 could happen, 10 would be a little less likely, but there's still a chance here this could get to a Cat 2 hurricane before landfall. It's not going to become a major hurricane, luckily, but a Cat 2 is not completely out of the question, but time's running out for that, and I think it'll probably be about a 95, 90-mile-an-hour storm here at landfall based on the indications I'm seeing. So a pretty nasty situation. Just about 3-4 days ago, we didn't even think we'd maybe have a depression here in toward Texas. The models, the European model, the GFS model, they weren't really picking up on much here. Euro kind of had it developing as it got inland, but this is a lot different scenario than things we're showing earlier in the week, and it's always a good sign here to make sure that you have that hurricane kit up to date, because it's unfortunately something where you have to really be watching here this year with these environmental conditions so favorable for things to just kind of spawn up here and kind of almost catch you off guard. You just want to have that water, make sure things are all ready to go here as this hurricane season does progress. If you're watching from North Florida, South Georgia, for instance, because things can happen quick. I know some of you are very familiar and unfortunately saw what happened with Hurricane Michael a couple years ago. So you just got to be on guard here. We'll be watching this storm as we get towards South Texas, and we'll be back here about 5:15 with more information. To repeat now, maximum sustained winds up to 90 miles an hour. Meteorologist Casey Cloud back here at 5:15 as we look at that infrared satellite imagery. You can see the storm getting so close here to making landfall. You see that moisture there on the east side here, and some of that's being fueled by the Gulf waters, but we're going to see still, I think, quite a bit more moisture coming here into the picture once we get the other side of the storm on the shore. So something to keep in mind as we watch. You see that green warning there for waterspout potential as well, so that could be a sign that maybe tornado potential will increase here as we look later in toward the evening hours as well. As we go over to the live Doppler radar right now, you can get that idea here of what things are happening, what is happening here. And as we continue to look, I'll go ahead and kind of zoom on down as we're getting the latest update here on the radar. I mean, landfall is very close. I mean, we're looking here at the center. I'm gonna go ahead and kind of do some on-side or I guess I could say here, some inside things right now as we're looking at about 30 miles across here. So if we get to the center, that's about right here. And then as we're looking, that's about 7 miles here, lowest pressure, give or take, from making landfall here. So we're getting very close to seeing a landfall occur in this area. Again, a hurricane warning remaining in effect here. I know they did just update that here a little while ago, so I'll try to get you that latest information here again in just a little bit. We saw that kind of be trimmed a little bit as areas to the north, not seeing quite as much here in the way of the worst accident because there has been a shift here based on what we were seeing yesterday with the track. I know we were expecting more of a northerly area there to be impacted, like Corpus Christi, maybe by the eye, but now we're seeing that toward the south. So that's some good news for them, some good news for some populated areas, but not good news for the more rural Kennedy County here, as we're seeing some of these spots here with this eye wall, with the western eye wall here, pretty much all of it on shore here at this point, as we're seeing still other parts of it there with the worst winds still yet to come on shore. As we're looking here, you see some of these areas that are in the eye right now. I mean, kind of interesting. I mean, you see some beach areas here on the satellite in the eye of the hurricane as we're watching. And I know as I broaden the view out, we do need to bear in mind here as well, something that's on a lot of people's minds here is the coronavirus, because the coronavirus has had a significant impact here in towards South Texas. And I know a storm like this really could cause more issues, really aggravate that situation, unfortunately. So definitely watching this so carefully here, making sure everybody stays safe here, and just really wanting people to get through this because they have to focus on the imminent threat of a hurricane and the threats that come with that, the flooding, the of course getting toward that wind potential here, and the tornado threat as well. And in terms of flooding, I'll kind of break that down into two categories. We have the rainfall flooding, that inland type flood threat that we'll be seeing above here later on as those totals add up here. But also that storm surge threat, and the storm surge has really been maximized here already, but that inland flooding could be a little worse even because these areas are very vulnerable here in South Texas to flash flooding. So we really have to be on guard in this area. We really need people to remember to turn around, don't drown. Just a bad situation. It could be worse. This isn't Harvey, don't get me wrong, but still a high-end Cat 1 hurricane, not what you want to see here. And we're going to be watching this as it does continue to progress. Again, that movement here, west-southwest at this point, and you do see again those hurricane force winds impacting some of these coastal areas here in Kennedy County, and we're going to be watching this progress again as we're looking further inland here in the Rio Grande Valley later on in toward the picture. So that's it for now. I'll be back in about 10 more minutes with more information. Meteorologist Casey Cloud back with you here at the bottom of the hour as we get the latest information in here on Hurricane Hanna, a high-end Category 1 storm as it gets very close to making landfall here. You see this with the track of, you see that center there. I mean, it is very close, within 10 miles, probably about 5 miles away here. That lowest pressure to center per se, getting there and officially having a landfall in towards southern Texas around the Padre Island area. It looks like there as we get kind of in a little bit closer on some other computers. I'll go ahead and see this eye here so you see exactly what I'm talking about. We're watching this very carefully here as it moves towards Kennedy, and toward Willacy counties here over the next little bit. We're also watching areas that are like Port Mansfield, for instance. That's the general area that it's in. Luckily, this is a lower populated area, but we do see the southern part of this eye wall getting into the Raymondville area, and there's about 10,000 people that live there. I was looking at the population information, so we do see that getting toward that community there, so people really wanting to be inside and away from windows. This is a dangerous situation for you guys there in Raymondville right now. You guys see a couple communities here pretty small in Kennedy County like Rudolph and Armstrong here, so a few areas getting in the worst of this storm. We're going to have more areas that'll get into this. We have up toward Clayburgh County there getting into some of this as well, and you see there's still more vivid storms here off the coast with more rotating potential, it seems. So we need to watch those as we progress here throughout the evening hours. So definitely tracking everything in terms of that. Now, I want to give you the wide perspective here on the track from the National Hurricane Center. I do have this in here right now. This is the 4 o'clock Central Time update, and I'll actually be able to see here that cone perspective that you're all familiar with those max sustained winds now up to 90 miles per hour, that movement off toward the west-southwest at about 8 miles per hour. The minimum pressure down to about 973 millibars. It's been that a little while. We saw some numbers a little lower, but apparently those, I guess, weren't quite what we were seeing there, maybe at the areas there where we were getting the accent to be more reasonable, I guess you could say there. That number maybe not quite reasonable. I'll have to look at the discussion here to see exactly what they're saying about that. But a hurricane warning in play here now from Port Mansfield to Port Aransas. It was trimmed a little bit there. It did go a little bit further north, but a tropical storm warning further north. But even that's been trimmed a little as we're seeing this concentrate here in toward parts of southern Texas. Again, a dangerous situation. A hurricane warning remaining in effect here for these communities. You see later on we see the tropical storm icon, and then eventually depression as this gets into Mexico, dumping torrential rain. Going to be seeing just a lot of that there. Those downpours. Just pretty nasty here. Those torrential downpours as we're looking here as we get toward your Sunday. We'll be seeing this very much so impacting these areas here as we look ahead. So let me go ahead now. We'll pop back up to the Doppler radar. We'll show you what's happening there. You'll be able to get that insider perspective here on what this is showing. Once again, that latest frame here from that radar site in Corpus Christi, and you see this. I mean, it is here very close. And then I have the Brownsville radar pulled up as well, that Brownsville radar, and you can see it from there as well. So let's go over to radar scope, and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about with this. You see this here, not too far away from McAllen or Harlingen. Either of those are very highly populated areas there for the southern Texas region. So we need to be watching for those folks here as well over the next little bit as this kind of dips south. They might get some of the worst impacts here. We'll just have to wait and see in terms of the populated areas and the impact to people here in the region. So we'll have to watch to see exactly how this dips over the next little bit. I'll kind of render this out here, and we'll just kind of see here the progress of this over the last little bit with the movement as it's kind of been moving west-southwest here. And you see that spin. It's kind of hard to see here, but I think Harlingen or McAllen, somewhere in that range, they'll be getting here a little worse of conditions over the next little bit. So just something to bear in mind as I go ahead and stop the movement for now. Again, these storms causing some issues here. I know in those poor drainage areas, you're going to have some problems. I know some flood advisories already in play, and the Weather Service right on cue here, just talking in the chat session, that they've received reports now of 7 to 8 inches of rain from Fort Mansfield, while the radar there is actually estimating around 4 inches. So even despite being in the tropical settings there with the radar, the tools likely underestimating the totals right now, so you have to keep that in mind as you're looking here. I'll pull up some of those estimates on the Brownsville radar. I know that's what they're talking about this right now, so let me go ahead and get that up. We'll look at the storm total rainfall here, and you'll be able to see some of these areas right near the coast getting some of these totals 8-10 inches just off, but you see these 4-5 numbers like they're talking about, and I see there's a flood advisory continuing down toward Cameron County here as well, so probably going to have flash flood warnings here at some point in some of these areas, so that's something we'll need to watch here carefully as the rain continues to fall, causing some pretty significant flooding issues. I did notice that the outlook did come out here from the Weather Prediction Center here earlier, and I noticed maybe the flood risk maybe not quite as high, but we'll just have to wait and see here. I'll have to crunch that information to see exactly what's that saying there. What that is saying there. So we're going to continue to watch this. Let's go ahead. We'll move this back over so you see that, and I'm going to go ahead and come back on the camera for right now as we continue to track things. Again, there's another view, and then we have our power outage information. I want to give you an update on this from poweroutage.us as the numbers are going up here. These numbers are going on up here as we're looking in toward the region. Let's go ahead and pop that on right now. We'll be able to see what is happening here as we get toward our power outage.us information, and you'll be able to see about 42,000 customers now in the state of Texas without power. And as we get down towards southern Texas, about 1,000 in Willacy County, about 1,000 customers there. It looks like Clayburgh County, 1,750. We see Kennedy, not so much, but there's not many people there. Getting up to the north there, we're looking at some of these other areas. I know Nueces County there, as we get toward Corpus Christi, 21,933 customers without power. So just trying to give you some of that perspective here real quick of the power outage information. So just kind of stick with me. I'll gather more information and be back here soon as we're watching that storm surge threat here as well. Meteorologist Casey Cloud back here at 45 past the hour. You see this storm here, and you see the eye, of Hanna, and you can really see that it is going to be making landfall here in just a few moments, probably. Right when we get that update here from the Hurricane Center at the top of the hour, maybe even a couple minutes before, it may say that it's made landfall, or if not, then a statement will probably come out right after that to show that it has. So, again, this is a dangerous hurricane here. Though technically just a Category 1, it's still having an impact to the spots here that are closest to the center, closest to this eye. Just really interesting, really mesmerizing, honestly, to be able to see this here so well on our technology and show it to you live. History in the making here, folks. The first landfalling hurricane of the decade here in the Atlantic Basin in the U.S. So just to kind of state that again, this is the first U.S. landfalling hurricane of the decade here. Let's hope most of them go over rural areas like this one, but not probably going to happen as we look here toward the future. We already have other areas of interest we're watching, but this is our first landfall on U.S. hurricane of the decade, and we're seeing it going toward Kennedy County here in southern Texas. Only about 400 or so residents there in the county, and that is some good news in that regard, but we're still seeing impact north and south of there, and of course for the people that are there, trying to be very careful. There might be about as many storm chasers there, honestly, as residents, but it's still very important for everybody to stay safe out there, even people that are trained to this. Sometimes you could be caught off guard by something here, and you just really want to be paying attention in toward this area, and we have that flooding threat that's going to have a wider footprint as we look out here toward the future. That flood threat definitely taking up here bigger areas. You already see some of these totals here getting a little higher now, around 5, 6 according to radar, but we've seen those numbers even higher according to measurements close to Port Mansfield here in southern Texas. Again, we're looking here at Nueces County, getting toward Clayburgh County and Kennedy County. You see, as we kind of go from up the coast to down the coast, some of the different impacts of radar technology is showing us right now, and then toward Willacy and Cameron as well. We're getting an idea of exactly what is happening there, and in terms of those wind speeds, you can see here the numbers around 90 or so just above the surface here toward areas like Armstrong, Rudolph. I know I saw something on social media from the Rudolph area. It looked like here recently getting those high numbers there, high gust values toward that region from a storm chaser. So just got to be careful there. You see some of these numbers here just off the coast pretty high as well. As we kind of look at different angles, the numbers up a little different. But we see these very high values here on the eastern side as well. And if you're in this eye, for those of you in the eye here, you got to be really careful because things can change quick. It's kind of calm there as we get toward the eye, and in the eye there it is very calm as you get there in the middle of it per se, as you watch the conditions here from east to west here kind of change. You'll be seeing those conditions deteriorate again as we look off here in the next little bit. So just got to be really careful here. I'm kind of waiting here for that latest information from the National Hurricane Center, see if we have that landfall yet. And let's see here, nothing yet. But this does say here a little while ago, this hurricane conditions occurring on portions of the Padre Island. So I'm going to be definitely tracking this here very carefully. Again, we're looking at some other tools. Interesting to see what's in here in the eye. Definitely insects, birds, something to that effect there. And they're kind of trapped in that because of the way the storm is structured. So definitely a sight to see there. But again, a serious situation for the people being impacted. That hurricane warning does continue here. We're watching there from the Port Aransas area. We're also looking there toward Port Mansfield as well here with that warning that's in effect. See another perspective here on the Doppler. We'll go ahead and see what is happening on our radar scope computer right now. It's to be able to see what is happening from the Brownsville radar. You'll be able to get that insider look at things here, kind of even go under the hood as I pull up our storm relative velocity from this radar. You'll be able to see the winds that are showing up here within this storm, and you see down toward Raymondville, again, some of these higher winds here. You'll be watching this very carefully in toward that community there, a little over 10,000 people there in toward that part of the region. So again, we're watching this We're getting there from the Corpus Christi TV market to the Brownsville market, too. We're kind of right on the line here as we see some of these worst conditions more impact the Kennedy County region and the Corpus Christi DMA, but then we're starting to get down there to the south and toward that Brownsville DMA here over the next little bit. So definitely something to bear in mind. I see that the storm surge warning, tropical storm warning for some spots, hurricane warnings for other spots continuing here. That information that's coming in from the chat session here at about 4:51 Central Time here on your Saturday. Again, we're watching history in the making, folks. I'll zoom back out. It's not a huge storm. It's not a destructive type storm where we'll be talking about it for years and years to come, probably. Some of the people down here might, but in terms of the local impacts, it's still pretty significant. And this will be the first hurricane that makes landfall here in the United States this decade here in toward southern Texas. You see the impacts there. Again, luckily, the worst of the storm staying between Corpus Christi and Brownsville right now. And as bad as it is for a storm to hit, if you want a storm to hit somewhere, if a storm has to hit somewhere, I should say, this is the spot for it to hit. And, that's what you're seeing right now here. Luckily, it's not going right into Corpus Christi because the impacts will be much different. Or right into Brownsville, though. It's going to dip down, and we'll have to watch here how close it gets to areas like McAllen, down toward Brownsville, and Raymondville even going to be getting into some of this, it seems, as we've seen that track kind of shift south here, as we've looked here at the latest information from the National Hurricane Center. And I'll go ahead now, we'll switch you away from this for now. Again, we're looking at some of this information. This was the latest update here from just a little while ago from the National Hurricane Center. And you see those max sustained winds are up to 90. We need them to be at 100 here on the estimate to get to a Category 2 storm. So that probably won't happen. Can't rule it out. We'll probably find out here in the next few minutes, honestly. And as we see that movement, it's west-southwest at 8 miles an hour. That pressure, 973 millibars. So we're still watching this situation very carefully here toward the Rio Grande Valley. I'll go ahead now and check again here to see if we have new information from the National Hurricane Center, because that new update should be coming out here soon. It has not come out yet, but we're going to continue to stick with you until that new update does come out to see if maybe we have an official landfall here even. It is very close, and if it doesn't officially make landfall here in this update, probably get a special update here as we look maybe closer toward the bottom of the hour or something like that. So I'm just looking here in the chat, getting some local information coming out there. But as you see down toward this region, that center, that eye, we're seeing that there in toward this region. Let's get over to another look at things. This will kind of help me measure some things out a little bit better. I'm going to measure the eye here on my source, and then I'm going to switch this over where the eye is about 28 miles across right now. So let's pop this on. And then as we look, 28 miles across, so let's go 14 miles. And then that center here, it'll probably be right, I'll go ahead and move the map over even just a little bit. That center is probably right about here, it looks like, right in there. So maybe right off the coast, but it's actually determined by pressure, so it could just barely be on the coast, and that's why they would call it a landfall. I know last year with Dorian in the Carolinas, there was a little controversy because the radar made it look like the center wasn't really hitting there, and there were some of those spots, the center of the center, but actually the pressure was lower there, a little bit closer towards land, and actually that center where the lowest pressure was, that part of the center at least, was impacting some of those spots. So something that was very impactful for those regions there. I know out toward Ocracoke Island, if I recall. So something that those communities still dealing with there in the recovery process. But speaking of issues, I know down here in the Rio Grande Valley, the coronavirus has hit really hard, been really, really serious for these communities. So that's something that we really have to watch to see how the numbers transpire here in the coming days and weeks, because with people sheltering together to prepare and to protect yourselves from a hurricane, you're going to have those numbers go up probably, but you have to do it because you got to think about the imminent threat here versus the longer-term threat. You got to focus on protecting yourself now, even though, unfortunately, later on it could have some bad consequences for some people, more than likely. It will, and we're going to have to just see how those stories come out here in the days and weeks and probably even months to come down toward this region. So again, the storm still in this region here in South Texas. Let's pull up our radar scope computer again. I just want to give you the latest frame here from Brownsville. We'll be able to say what is happening. You'll be able to get a look here at some of those bands here on the eastern side as well, because those are very well defined here. You see those marine warnings in play. You see those threats here into these spots, into these communities here. Eventually, as it does come on shore, at least, you'll be getting this translating there. So you could have some tornadic activity later on. You see quite a few spins here in the atmosphere. I'll circle some of them while we have the time, while we're just kind of waiting. You see one of them down here. We'll look up to the north. You just see spins, honestly, all along this. I'll kind of just circle the whole line because some of them are stronger than others, but the one I circled down there, one of the stronger ones. This one's standing out here, it looks like, as well. So you get the idea we're having that rotation type potential here eventually. And that rotation potential, as we go ahead and kind of get a measurement here on this, we see those winds, of course, a little bit weaker, but then again, you have the different directions. But this rotation potential is about 50 miles from shore, give or take. So this could take a while here. It could be something later on, and maybe if we lose some stability, that could help maybe suppress that tornado threat a little. We'll just have to wait and see. No tornado watch in play at the last check. We did just get a measurement, though, on the Harlingen sensor there at the Harlingen International Airport, a gust of 50 knots. So we're getting those high numbers there as we look toward the south. There's Harlingen right in there. And we'll go ahead and pull up the radar again as we zoom in there. We're getting into the farthest county south and east here into Texas, and you see there's Harlingen getting some stronger winds. I mean, 34 knots is tropical force, so this is a gust well into tropical force here. Definitely something that is being felt in toward that area, probably knocking out some more power even. So just kind of have to be cognizant of that potential. So we're now at 4:57 Central, 5:57 Eastern on this Saturday. Meteorologist Casey Cloud continuing our coverage here of Hurricane Hanna as it does make landfall here in toward southern Texas. As we look here, we're going to look for that new information out from the National Hurricane Center. And they're now saying it has made landfall. Okay, folks, breaking news. Our storm Hanna has made landfall there on Padre Island in Texas. Let me read this to you, and then we'll go ahead and get into some more things here in the actual mapping. But Hanna now officially making landfall here, folks. The eye of Hurricane Hanna making landfall on Padre Island right about now, about 15 miles north of Port Mansfield, with maximum sustained winds at 90 miles an hour. A site in the area recently recorded sustained winds of 60 and a gust to hurricane force at 74, and a buoy, a gust to 69 there recently as well. So again, we have Hurricane Hanna making landfall on Padre Island here in South Texas. Hanna, the first hurricane to make landfall here in the U.S. of the decade here. It's making landfall as a Category 1 storm, maximum sustained winds at 90 miles per hour. So definitely the impact of this being felt here. Again, the late-breaking details just in from the National Hurricane Center. Hanna has officially made landfall about the time we thought it would here, based on radar analysis in the Weather Center as we continue to track this storm. Again, Hanna here making landfall at pretty much 5 o'clock Central Time, 6 o'clock Eastern here on this Saturday. And we're right there, Padre Island area, not far from Port Mansfield. So again, we're getting in a little bit tighter to show you what is happening and look at the chat information. We'll continue to look at that here. Again, if you're tuning in for the top of the hour, I'm meteorologist Casey Cloud. Hurricane Hanna has officially made landfall as a Category 1 storm here. Hanna making landfall as a Category 1 storm here in southern Texas. They're in the South Padre Island, or really Padre Island area, with those maximum sustained winds of 90 miles an hour. So again, we're watching this 15 miles north of Port Mansfield. So again, I'll continue to gather more information on this. 15 miles north of Port Mansfield, Padre Island, those max sustained winds of 90 miles per hour. I'll be back with more here soon. Again, the big news, our storm Hanna has made landfall here in the Lone Star State. We'll be tracking it as it moves across here As we get later in toward the evening hours, some very dangerous conditions are going to continue here with those flooding rains, those gusty winds, that storm surge even still a threat as well based on the wind direction and high tide as well. Meteorologist Casey Cloud back here at 15 past the hour with another update on Hurricane Hanna. And if you're just joining us, it did officially make landfall here. That's been declared as of about 15 minutes ago there on Padre Island, a Category 1 storm with maximum sustained winds about 90 miles per hour. So we're seeing this here impact the state here, the southern part of the state at least, with torrential rain, that storm surge, very impactful in some spots. Also, they are seeing some very nasty conditions in terms of rotating storms here as we look off the coast that could ultimately translate here inland over the next little bit and produce some tornadic activity. So the rain, the winds, the surge, and the tornado threat here is what we are following today. And we're going to be seeing this here in toward Kennedy County, Willacy County, up toward areas like Clayburgh County as well. I know we're kind of repeating ourselves here just because the storm isn't moving a whole lot. So something to bear in mind as we're seeing this impact the Texas coast right now. We're going to look here at some interesting things, see what's trapped here in the eye on our correlation coefficient from Brownsville. Kind of interesting to see this because some things are just kind of like insects and other things there as well are not able to get out of the eye right now. Eventually, this eye will break down, of course, and that'll change. But just the way this is formed here, things, birds trapped in that eye. So something that is worth noting here. But again, the impacts being felt here. Let's pull up some winds. We haven't pulled those up in a little while. So let's go ahead and pull some of these up. I know we don't have some sensors right at the worst of this, and that's good because that's indication there. That's an indication that we're in a lesser populated area. But you see a gust there to 41 knots at Corpus Christi Naval Air Station, a gust here to 42 knots at Port Isabel at Cameron County Airport, and over toward Harlingen, a gust to 44 knots. So there's our tropical force gust there that kind of moved this down a little bit. I'll broaden it out a little bit more to give you better perspective. So that's just something that's kind of worth noting here with the overall numbers. So again, this storm has officially made landfall at 5 o'clock Central, 6 o'clock Eastern, a Category 1 hurricane with maximum sustained winds of 90 miles an hour. Let's go ahead. We'll go back over to the other Doppler radar view that we've been using over the last little bit to give you a little bit different look at things. And you'll be able to see what's happening there toward the Rio Grande Valley. You see those torrential downpours here, and they're going to continue to increase in intensity as we're looking later on. So that flash flooding threat will probably increase as we get toward the nighttime hours. So very important to remember to turn around, don't drown here if you're in this area. Again, we're continuing to watch all sorts of different viewpoints on this, and I'll be back here in about 12 minutes or so with more. Meteorologist Casey Cloud back with you here at the bottom of the hour as we continue to look here at our storm. This is a different perspective on it. A hurricane, the visible satellite. We'll lose this here in a little bit when the sun goes down, but I just wanted to kind of show you what is happening here. You see the eye of the storm here, folks, making landfall in southern Texas. A really interesting look at it there in toward this region. We get down here tight, and you can just see here a little bit less cloud cover there in toward areas there of the county. We're talking, of course, in toward parts of the rural areas there. So we're going to be continuing to track this there in toward Kennedy County with this hurricane making on the landfall, and we're going to go ahead and watch this here over the next little bit just to see what type of impacts are being felt in toward some of these neighboring communities here as well. I'll kind of broaden the view out just a little bit here, and you'll be able to see what is happening with this from the more broad perspective. So definitely something to see, something to look at there, and just kind of be thankful if you're watching from North Florida and South Florida that we're not being impacted by it. It developed so quick, this Category 1 hurricane did, and impacts there being felt in toward southern Texas. You see it here in toward Kennedy County right now. You see areas here toward the north and west, toward the south and west, getting in toward the impacts here. For instance, we're talking, it looks like over toward areas like Sharita, for instance, and then down, of course, toward Raymondville as well. So, again, we're going to be watching. We're going to be moving this here off toward the west-southwest as it does impact here the Rio Grande area. Over the next several hours, bringing those torrential downpours here. Corpus Christi getting spared from the worst of this, but the storm surge has still been pretty substantial up toward the north here with the way the winds have been. We're still watching some of that threat there as this storm does start to move on inland, only moving here 7-8 miles an hour. So it's still taking its time here, and it's still going to take a little while for things to improve there. And we have high tide to contend with as well. So that's something that needs to be definitely monitored. Let's go ahead and pull back on radar scope, and you'll be able to see a different look at this here with the eye, with this hurricane. The first hurricane here to make landfall in toward Texas since 2008 with Dolly, and something that is pretty impactful for these folks here. I remember Dolly watching that coverage there 12 years ago, and the Brownsville area was really impacted badly. Their power was out for a while, and people really had some issues. Just a little weaker. I think it was a Cat 2 as I recall, but still a Category 1 storm, the impacts being felt. This is a more rural area being impacted too, so that's something to keep in mind, because that one went closer to Brownsville, McAllen, so that's something that the folks really had to deal with there. I remember watching those Brownsville stations covering that situation, and luckily it isn't quite as bad for them. It doesn't look like down there in those communities as of now, but we still got to watch that flooding rain threat. That's kind of the wild card in all of this here as we look ahead later in the evening hours to see if things maybe look a little worse than what we're anticipating here in toward southern Texas. I'll go ahead and come back on camera right now. We're at 34 past the hour on your Saturday. Again, there's the wind direction that's so important. I'm going to go ahead and get our storm surge information up to date here, see if we can pull some of this up. If I can't pull it up, I'll at least kind of read it out to you here on our other system. I'll go ahead and kind of give you some of these numbers down toward that region that's being most impacted. I see Port Aransas here. We're seeing values about 2.5 feet there, so something that's being an issue for them. We're seeing that issue there. And as I move down the coast here, one of the areas really impacted. We had storm surge over 5 feet earlier at the Bob Hall Pier there in Corpus Christi. We're now seeing those values down closer to about 3 feet. But the next high tide here is going to be later on as we look. So we'll have to see if that affects things. But we're seeing the storm starting to move inland a little. We'll just have to kind of watch to see how things are affected here on the micro scale level by this. I know in their advisory at 5 o'clock, the standard one, the 4 o'clock central full advisory, they were still warning for the potential for storm surge up to 6 feet there from Baffin Bay to Port Aransas, including the Corpus Christi Bay. So that's something everybody just has to be very careful of. And as we look at power outage numbers now, they're really going up. They're still not extreme per se, but they're worth noting here. So let's pop it on. You see PowerOutage.us now has about 388 customers in Kennedy County out of power, but remember, there's not that many there, and that kind of is important to factor in because we're seeing that's about a third of the county. As we get toward the north there, we have Clayburgh County, about 2,000, but then as we get toward Corpus Christi, of course, we're looking there toward Nueces County. We're seeing about 20,000 customers without power. Brownsville by 8,000 there in Cameron County. So the numbers going up, still not extreme, but those numbers are going to continue to go up throughout the evening. So if you're living further inland per se, I would be charging up my devices here if I'm living here further off in toward the Rio Grande Valley. Just kind of be mindful of what is happening here as we look at some of the different numbers in the weather center. Again, there's your storm one more time. We're continuing to watch it. I'll be back in about 9 more minutes with more. Meteorologist Casey Cloud here, back at about 45 past the hour. We're still watching a hurricane. This is one perspective of it. Here's another looping motion here of this moving into Kennedy County, but you also now see a flash flood warning in play here as we're getting some very torrential downpours as we go over to the live view here of the Doppler radar. This is our first flash flood warning in this area from the storm in deep South Texas. We're talking about north central Cameron, southeastern Kennedy, and central Willacy counties here until 8:30 Central Time tonight, as we've been tracking that heavy rain in the area, and between 7 and 9 inches has now fallen there. So flash flooding's either ongoing or expected to begin shortly, as we're seeing this indicated by the Doppler radar there around the Port Mansfield Chamber of Commerce and the Port Mansfield Airport as well. So getting that flooding potential to take hold here now, and this is what we're concerned about as we look later on into the evening hours, folks, with this storm as it gets closer toward nighttime. That flash flooding potential is going to increase. The flooding potential is going to increase. So we have to be mindful here of what's going to happen. You see areas just east of Raymondville here getting into this rain as well here with the Bannon. Raymondville is kind of right on the edge right now, but that's going to change, and it's already starting to change here as you get more embedded here within this, and your rain rates will pick up, and you might go under a flash flood warning in that area here pretty soon as we get further west into Willacy County. So again, there's the eye of the storm. There's the well-defined structure here as we're getting closer towards 6 o'clock Central, 7 o'clock Eastern. You see some of these areas here. Sharita, for instance, getting into some of this rain here, some of the acts, and luckily a pretty rural area, but still you see some of these winds just above the surface and some of these translating down as we're looking off the Brownsville radar right now. We're just going to some different things here to see some different perspectives and see some things that are embedded here in the center in the eye, insects, maybe also some birds, something that's interesting there as the storm right now is still pretty well defined in towards southern Texas. You see some of this banding. This is in northern Mexico. Going to be causing some issues there. Some rotation involved here it looks like, but we wouldn't get tornado warnings on here for those areas because that is not covered there by the National Weather Service. In these regions, we're looking down toward Mexico and the other countries' weather offices there. So we're going to be looking there to see what happens because I know we'll have that threat hold as we get later on in the evening. We might see more of that here in towards southern Texas as we look later on. Again, you're looking at the velocity a little bit. This kind of gives us a look here at some of that wind potential in this area. Some of these areas that are being most impacted here by this hurricane, by this Category 1 storm, as this eventually moves down here closer to Brooks County, Hidalgo County, Jim Hogg County, Stark County as well. Those areas will be impacted and eventually moving into more Mexico here, but still bringing some of that moisture up here and keeping that moisture around even into tomorrow here in the war parts of southern Texas and the Rio Grande Valley, causing some issues. That flooding threat's just starting to get going. As you see with that flash flood warning, we're going to see more of those, I would think, as we look later on. A flash flood watch in effect for the region here, and we're seeing the damage potential with that. We've already seen the damage potential with the storm surge, tornadic activity, at least a report of one earlier. We did have a warning in play down toward areas there of the region, and also we even had a situation there where we've seen some gusts that have been pretty high, in fact, in these spots. As we were just showing you here, going between some of our different things, we're actually getting ground confirmation of some of the higher gusts here in the region, a hurricane type gust here. Just on shore, just off the shore, you get the idea, as we've been seeing some pretty big issues there in the Port Mansfield area, for instance. So again, we're going to look over some information here. We said we get a new update here soon at the top of the hour. I'll check. If we have it, I'll go ahead and bring it to you, but otherwise we'll wait here and come back at the top of the hour and give you that then. But let's see if we have new information. We're still in the 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock update. So what I'll do, I'll wait here in the Weather Center, but I'm not going to actually stay talking like I have the last couple of hours, since things are now going to start falling in terms of these numbers, as this has made landfall now, and it'll start to wind down some, but still causing issues, and still going to cause issues, especially here with those winds knocking out more power in these next few hours or so. Meteorologist Casey Cloud back here at the top of the hour as we continue to watch the situation transpiring in Texas here with Hurricane Hanna. We just got that latest information in, that latest update from the National Hurricane Center, at maximum sustained winds still at 90 miles an hour as this Category 1 hurricane moves west-southwest at about 8 miles an hour. So definitely causing some issues still here in Texas. I see some information just into the chat session where pictures of water levels due to the storm surge. You can see the levels there reaching the base of the art museum there in Nueces County, 6 miles southwest of the community of Portland even. So not good to hear about there as those numbers really going up. I know those numbers went up pretty quick there in the forecast as things deteriorated. The wind speeds got stronger and those levels ultimately increased and became more impactful because of it. So let's go ahead and pull back up here, other view here as we look toward Texas. Again, you see the storm, you see this, the position earlier hasn't moved all that much, but I mean, that's about 8 miles an hour. I mean, honestly, as we look here, it's about 15 miles or so to the center. So 70 miles an hour. That kind of tells the story from where it was a couple hours ago. So we're seeing this still as it progresses. I mean, as we get toward 2 a.m., it's going to be down to a tropical storm at that point. 1 a.m. Central Time as we get down closer to McAllen, Texas here, and in toward that area there. Not even far away from McAllen. Well, I mean, we've already kind of referenced that, of course, but talking also the Rio Grande City area as well. So we'll be watching even further off toward the west to see impacts there. I know we're watching areas like Zapata, Texas, for instance. We'll have to watch to see how they're impacted there. So again, the hurricane warning does continue. We're still watching things as they evolve. You can see the wind there pretty high now to the south. The storm surge, of course, not an issue as we have the wind going away from the coast, and that's what happens. One direction, one side of the storm, you have winds going one way, and the other side of the storm, you have the winds going in. So that's where you have the problems when the winds are pushing the water in and you're getting those impacts there up toward areas near and around Corpus Christi, as you saw, as you've heard with those reports I've been giving you information on. Let's go ahead and pull up our Reader Scope computer again. We're going to go ahead and refresh that now, and you'll be able to see what is happening there as we continue to keep everybody safe and informed here tonight in this region. And if you have family and friends there, let them know I'm doing this coverage, trying to give another perspective here of what is happening with this hurricane moving into South Texas. Worst impact in toward this area in the month of July since 2008. So we're talking Hurricane Dollar that year, and that really had big issues. They had big issues there, big problems down toward McAllen and Brownsville with widespread power outages in the Rio Grande Valley. So something that people are really watching there in the RGV as we're continuing here to look at this storm, look at this hurricane. I see marine warnings coming out, and that means maybe waterspout potential. We'll have to see how that translates. I know with Hurricane Michael, we didn't really get tornadic potential closer to the storm, and we'll have to see. This isn't Hurricane Michael, but my point is sometimes when you have storms kind of strong like this, it might take a while for the shear to kind of catch up here and get that tornado potential to really kick in. And we'll just have to watch and wait. I know some of this be going into Mexico here, and that's some good news as we're seeing some of that energy here with this, at least not moving up in toward the U.S. to bring that potential. I know we've had a storm one time coming here and go up toward Dallas and produce quite a few tornadoes. I think they're on the weaker side, but my point is, you at least this won't be impacting the U.S., but my thoughts and prayers are out for those in toward Mexico as well, with a very dangerous scenario ahead of them, and they have to deal with the coronavirus there as well. So again, we're watching this situation here. I kind of zoom out a little bit more. We'll keep our eyes on this computer system. I'll go ahead and come back here on camera and just kind of let you know again. You see how the winds have been going here in toward the region here, bringing that water in. We'll zoom out now give you a little bit better view of the situation. I'll take off the arrows, and you still see this storm as it still has. I mean, this is a pretty rural area. I know I feel like I'm repeating myself, but there's not many areas here, and that means we don't have as many reports, and that also means we don't have as many communities to talk about. So it makes things kind of repetitive here, and that's a good thing, and that we're not getting reports left and right here in the Weather Center of extreme issues. So at some point, I'll probably be tapering back to coverage, but we have to at least stick with it a little while longer here, as this is still a hurricane, and it's still impacting some communities pretty badly. I mean, Raymondville is probably getting some of the worst weather they've got from the storm the whole time, and even up towards Sarita as well. So we'll be watching here at its peak intensity, at least, as this storm does continue to move west-southwest at about 8 miles an hour or so. I'll be back in about 9 minutes with more information. Meteorologist Casey Cloud back here at 7:15 on your Saturday, 7:15 Eastern, that is 6:15 Central, as we continue to monitor the progress here of Hurricane Hanna. Made landfall just a little over an hour ago there on Padre Island and toward parts of Kennedy County, Texas. So an impactful storm for that region, though. Luckily, it's a relatively rural area, but we're going to have to watch here over the next little bit as we get down toward the Rio Grande Valley. I know we're seeing Raymondville already getting into some of the worst of this, but we're going to have to watch for McAllen here as well, some of these higher populated areas, because as we get toward Kennedy County, there's only 400 or so people in the entire county, so things are definitely remote in that region. It's the fourth least populated county in the whole United States where it's hit. So if you had to have a hurricane hit somewhere, this is where you would have it to hit, honestly, because less people are being impacted, luckily. But we still have to watch because there's still a flooding potential to come, and we did see a storm surge potential. I know up toward Corpus Christi, they've had some pretty big concerns with that storm surge. Even I know up toward it looks like the art museum, according to information in the chat session, looks like some issues there. So gonna have to continue to watch with that storm surge there in toward Nueces County as we continue to look at this storm. We continue to watch for tornadic potential as well. I'll tell you this up here real quick, and we'll go to our significant tornado parameter. It's not showing up too much right now, which is good news, but we'll have to see how the night goes on. We do have some marine warnings. Of course, we have that flash flood warning here in play as well. You see on the southern part of the eye there, that flash flood warning continuing from north central Cameron as well as southeastern Kennedy and central Willacy counties here to 8:30 Central Time. 7 to 9 inches of rain have already fallen, so gonna have some issues in this area. And as we look here over toward the totals, you see that rain gonna probably translate here into toward some of these spots here. Again, we're talking here down toward parts of Cameron, Willacy counties here, of course Kennedy as well. And we'll just have to continue to see how this evolves into a more populated urban area eventually, because I know they've had some pretty big flood events here over the years down toward the Rio Grande Valley. The people really need to remain alert for that. Remember that motto from the National Weather Service, to turn around, don't drown. That's very important to keep in mind here tonight. We'll have to continue to watch the wind threat as well. I'll look at the power outage information real quick. I won't pull it up on the screen this time, but I'll just get a quick look at it here on my end. And we're now for 50,000 according to poweroutage.us in the state of Texas without power. About half of Kennedy County, which isn't many people. It says 1,000 customers there, and I know some other numbers of 400 or so people in the county, give or take. So somewhere, I mean, the census data might not be updated. Somewhere in a number there between about 400 and 1,000 people. We're seeing about half the county without power. Willacy County, more than half the county, with about 5,000 customers that are in the dark right now. Up toward Clayburgh County, about 2,000, and in Corpus Christi, about 20,000 customers in that county. So just trying to give you some of those numbers. Even Brownsville's counties at about 10,000 right now as we look toward the south. So we'll be watching. Let's pull up another view of the Doppler radar right now. We'll be able to see what is happening here on the radar scope computer right now. This gives you a look. You see Harlingen starting to get closer to some of the worst of this. This is probably going to dip into Harlingen, at least some of the worst of the winds here. I know we've already seen some reports there, but yeah, just looking at that pattern, we got to watch the Harlingen area over the next little bit because of this dip. And if it's just going due west, even then, at this point, it looks like they'd probably get clipped by the southern eye wall. But now, with that dip, they're going to even get into more of it here over the next little bit. So they got to remain on guard there in the ward out region for this flooding potential, for the wind potential to escalate. If you haven't lost power there in Harlingen already, you might in the next little bit. So target those devices if you can. Try to get that energy level there on your phones as high as possible, because if you lose that power, you could be out a while, and you want to have that phone for communication purposes. Very important, of course. McAllen, same thing, as we're looking at some higher populated areas here that are going to be impacted probably by the eye wall of our hurricane, of Hurricane Hanna here. So we want folks to stay safe out there. And if you feel uncomfortable, treat it like a tornado situation. Put as many walls between you and the outside as possible. Get in that interior room, and maybe put a bicycle helmet on even if you feel uncomfortable here this evening. So we just want you to be very, very careful. Take all those precautions here my game plan for the coverage, I'll go ahead. We'll move away from radar scope right now. Game plan for the coverage here is to come back at the bottom of the hour with another update on this stream. And then after that, we're going to go ahead in this stream, but we're going to switch to another stream here and continue coverage. It'll be a little less frequent unless things really ramp up here in some of these areas. But we'll have the radar up there continuously so you can see exactly what is happening with this storm. And we'll be showing you that. And when I say continuously with the radar, I'll mix in probably some satellite images as well. So some imagery of the storm released here continuously when I'm not on camera. So you know exactly what is happening here if you have friends and family in towards South Texas as we're looking ahead with that flash flooding threat, maybe a tornado threat here later on. The parameters didn't look all that impressive as we were just looking, but that flash flooding threat at least seems to be pretty much a sure bet to ramp up here as we look later on in this evening. For now, meteorologist Casey Cloud. I'll be back here in about 9 minutes with more. Meteorologist Casey Cloud back here at the bottom of the hour, continuing to track the progress of Hurricane Hanna, still a 90-mile-per-hour hurricane, a Category 1 storm in toward parts of South Texas. We see this here in deep South Texas, this system moving west-southwest at about 8 miles per hour right now, and we'll continue to watch it as it does impact some of these communities here toward McAllen later on as we get toward that eye wall. That's very important. Now, some of this will spread out too as it gets over land a little bit more as well, but we're going to be watching to see some of the worst impacts here in the eye wall itself as we get towards some of these other areas in toward this region. You see Raymondville getting in this, probably the highest population area that's gotten into this eye wall here so far. So it's very important to be cognizant of what is happening there as they're getting some pretty nasty conditions as torrential downpour. And you see a flash flood warning just toward the east here. We'll be watching for more of those later tonight as more moisture. I mean, we have a lot more moisture to go, folks. A lot of it's still over the water, and it's still got to make its way inland here. We'll give you another perspective of the Doppler radar right now. We'll switch you over to radar scope, and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. We still have even, look at that banding in Mexico. You even see a tornado vortex signature down there. I'll go ahead and highlight what I'm talking about. You see it right down here, that tornado vortex signature here. And maybe even a tornado trying to develop. We don't have warnings for Mexico up on here, but something that those folks have to be cognizant of and paying attention there for that potential. You see some lightning even. I'll check to see if there's a couplet. Just kind of curious here as you get in northern Mexico. See if there's a green versus red area off the Brownsville side, or if this is just a false return. You see all that lightning? That's sometimes an indicator here of some tornadic activity, and you see areas of rotation in toward this area. You see some greens and reds, not really tight, but there is some rotation here, and it'd be close maybe if there'd be a tornado warning issued as you get maybe a weak type tornado in this situation here in this environment. You see some other areas of rotation as well. We'll look closer toward the Texas coast, and you see some spots here rotating as well, but they're not as well defined, so that's some good news. But you see that wind here over Raymondville right now. Now, some of this isn't reaching the ground like it looks like it would because things are a little distorted right now. But my point being is we definitely have some winds here above the surface that are trying to translate to the ground there and causing issues in toward Raymondville, Texas here. And we're watching, this is west of Port Mansfield. You see Port Mansfield right over here, and then as we put on the eye of the storm, you'll be able to see where that is, and you see the southern part of the eye itself over Port Mansfield still, but in the eye wall over Raymondville and over some of these other communities here down toward the south as well. We're going to be watching some of these spots. I know as we look here, we're going to be watching Santa Monica, for instance, popping up there in toward Texas. And we're watching to see some of these different communities here, how they get in the eye wall, because so far the eye wall hadn't been in many populated areas just based on the nature of things. And Port Mansfield already getting issues in probably the most populated area had been in, but now you're seeing this spread across here and cause some issues here in toward parts of deep South Texas. Again, we're watching the Rio Grande Valley, of course, and I'll go ahead and pop this away from radar scope now, pop myself back on camera, and we're continuing to watch this storm very carefully. You see the track here. This is where it's supposed to be about 1 a.m. Central Time tonight as we look down here toward areas not far from McAllen, and this will eventually be going into Mexico, as you can see with the track, an unusual track here for a system like this in this spot. And we're going to be seeing that at least move away from the U.S., but terrible flooding probably in toward parts of northern Mexico here as well. So just got to be very cognizant down there as well, as I just try to kind of re-emphasize that. I know I repeat myself over and over here, but in a situation like this, we have to kind of keep everybody up to date on exactly what is happening at the very minute. And if it's the same, we just want people that are just tuning in to get that information as well. So again, we're going to be tracking here Sarita, Raymondville, eventually looks like here with some of the higher winds. We're going to be watching maybe areas here, Santa Elena, for instance, getting into this, it seems, over the next little bit. So pretty rural communities at least, but some of these areas going up a little bit in population value there. So we'll have to watch that here. Again, the wind arrows here, this kind of tells a story where you're seeing the wind spin around the circulation here, spin around this hurricane, this Category 1 storm. And we'll be watching here how this does go ahead and again spread that moisture. I do see we have a tornado warning somewhere in the country, but I don't think it's down here. It's actually in Minnesota right now, so just want to check on that here. That's toward the Twin Cities, actually. Central Sibley County there in central Minnesota. We won't move away from this on this mapping here, but just thought I'd pop that on to make sure it wasn't something I was missing here. But I did just get an update on this flash flood warning, by the way. It's continuing down here. And the latest information now, 7 to 10 inches of rain falling in that area. That has fallen there. So, not good. Talking about Port Mansfield, Chamber of Commerce, Port Mansfield Airport, getting into this, and another 2 to 4 inches of rain possible here. As we look at some of these totals, you can see that rain. It's over 10 inches in this yellow color coming on into the picture here. So it's something that you have to be aware of. And we'll be seeing that spread on in over the next little bit. As we look toward the north, you see some of these numbers less, but still 3-4 inches. And this has been underestimated, as we've heard, based on actual reports from the National Weather Service offices there toward Corpus Christi, toward Brownsville. So you got to keep that in mind as well. Looking at some different things here. Just trying to see if there's anything that gives us a different type of perspective. Some of these winds here on the site, you see some of these purple indicators. We're seeing those tropical force gusts here still getting over toward the Edinburgh International Airport, Harlingen International Airport there. Also down toward the Port Isabel, Cameron County Airport. So kind of tells the story. And you see out toward areas of Brooks County, Texas as well. Some other spots a little bit less, but just another update on that storm. And we will pop this up real quick because out toward Minnesota now, because there's a confirmed tornado on the ground there. Looks like about 22 miles southeast of Hutchinson or over Gaylord. So a nasty situation there. This is not too far from the Twin Cities. So we just thought we'd pop that on real quick. No tornado threat, but there's a marginal risk of severe weather, so just if you have family and friends not related to our system, of course, but we'll keep our eyes on that for you. But back to the hurricane we go. Hurricane Hanna here, again, making landfall over the last little bit in toward southern Texas with a maximum sustained winds of 90. Padre Island, the first hurricane in the Atlantic Basin to make landfall this decade here in the United States, the first hurricane of the decade in the Atlantic Basin whatsoever. So that's something to factor in. You just get a gust at the Harlingen International Airport now to 55 knots, so getting even higher now. So values increasing there as we're getting closer there to being in that eye wall, and that is very impactful there. That'll be knocking out more power down toward that region. Our radar scope computer again. We'll go ahead and see what that looks like one more time, and you'll be able to see here. You see that storm system. Again, it's starting to progress a little bit further inland, but that means it's getting into more populated areas, so more power will go out here. And that'll be something we'll be watching here throughout the night as well. So just kind of stick with me from that aspect. Now, in terms of power outage information at the present time, I'll go ahead and pull that up here real quick. And we'll be able to see, according to PowerOutage.us, the numbers have actually dropped a little bit. That's some good news, but I expect those numbers to start spreading on further in toward the region, those higher numbers, as we get over toward Brooks County, toward Hidalgo County, toward Duval County, Texas. Not Duval County, Florida, but there's actually a Duval County, Texas there as well that we're looking at. So something that's kind of worth noting. But one last look before we wrap this update up of Hurricane Hanna, still a Category 1 storm. Still tracking here across deep South Texas, bringing that rain, bringing that wind, still some storm surge, and a tornado threat to come as well. Thanks so much for tuning in on this version of the update here, this stream of the update and the updates. I'm meteorologist Casey Cloud. I'll go ahead and be on here in just a little bit with more information as we continue our coverage. It'll be a little bit ramped down per se, as we're seeing some of the same areas being impacted, and we're not dealing with maybe as much in the way of a threat here as we look towards some of the coastal communities ultimately, as things are going to start to wind down some, but still that inland flood threat, there's still something pretty substantial, and the power outages are still going to go up in the inland areas that aren't used to winds like this as well. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm meteorologist Casey Cloud.